Welcome back, folks. We're going to get started with our next speaker. As Dr. Nelson indicated before the break, we're going to take Sergeant Jim Gerhardt out of order. He has a plane to catch in a few hours. We want to make sure he has plenty of time to catch his flight back to Colorado. So Jim Gerhardt and our next speaker, Chelsea Clark, drawing a blank, has provided an insightful and factual look at what is exactly happening in the state of Colorado today. These two people are not cherry-picking studies or spinning data. They're actually on the front line, collecting data and research, investigating, going into the dispensaries, and analyzing exactly how legalization is being implemented in the state of Colorado. So we're very fortunate to have them come here today and present their information, because I think it is certainly a window into looking at our future in the state of California, how we will deal with some of these same issues potentially moving forward, whether we're dealing with medical marijuana or we're dealing with recreational marijuana. Their experiment in Colorado is very helpful to us here in California. So at this time, I'd like to welcome Sergeant Jim Gerhardt.
All right, so I've been able to spend the last day and a half listening to everybody talk bad about Colorado, and now it's my turn. I'm going to talk bad about Colorado. I'm a native, and I love Colorado, but thank you. Thanks, Mom. But I don't like the path that we've gone down, and it's not just in relationship to what we've done with marijuana, but we've taken a really, in my view, dangerous turn on a lot of drug policy in Colorado. And now all of a sudden we're wondering why Colorado has some of the highest rates of opiate abuse, heroin overdoses, marijuana use, as if we don't understand these two things are related. So at any rate, I'm the vice president in addition to my day job as a sergeant with the drug task force in the Denver area. I'm also the vice president of the state's Drug Investigators Association. And it's on this behalf that I'm here today. I'm not speaking for anybody but myself and the Colorado Drug Investigators Association. And in fact, today's a day off for me. I'm not even on duty today in any way, shape, or form. And the reason I bring that up is because I do a lot of presentations trying to at least give people an insight into what my view of this problem is like. And in some corners, marijuana advocates have decided to label me and try to discredit me through internet articles like this one. It says right up at the top, "Meet the cop getting paid to lie to voters and politicians about pot." And it goes on and on. Right under that picture of me is this really nasty quote. It's all about, it's an anti-marijuana quote, but it uses racial slurs and other things. And it's insinuating as if I said those things. Now the person who actually said it is attributed at the very end. However, there's no change in font, so when you glance it, it's intended to look as though I said it. And then it goes point by point into a presentation I made, and it claims that I lied about this and I lied about that. And so between what you're going to see here today from me and a very excellent presentation by Chelsea Clark, because usually I do a combined thing where I show some of the HIDTA data and then compare that to what we're seeing on the street, you guys are going to see these lies, supposedly, that I'm telling here in this presentation. But I wanted to make it clear, I'm not being paid to be here today. Nobody's paying me to be here. The California Narcotics Officers Association paid for my flight and my hotel room, but that's it. As a matter of fact, Patrick even offered me money. He said, look, what's easiest for me is we'll cover the flight, we'll cover all your expenses, and we'll throw in a little speaking fee bonus because I can make that happen easily through our system. And I said, I don't want it. I don't want that because I don't want this. I don't want anybody to claim that I'm making money or profiting somehow off of sharing with you our story. So, but it's not just me that gets this treatment. Basically, anyone. Thank you. But it's not just me that gets this treatment. Basically, anybody who's outspoken about this effort becomes the target of these sorts of attacks. Because they were trying to spread information and the truth, and what ends up happening is people want to twist it and distort it and discredit the person so that this message gets stifled. This gentleman here was a very good friend of mine, commander of our task force. He was the president of our Drug Investigators Association, and they label him as out of touch with marijuana policy in Colorado. I was in Texas not long ago at the Sheriff's Association, and I met this sheriff here, Travis, and I was showing that picture of, that I'm supposedly this liar about marijuana, and he says, well, hey, look what they did to me, and he showed me this. And basically, because he was outspoken against medical marijuana in his county and community, that the advocates pitted him as if he hates this little girl right here that has seizures and epilepsy. That's how heartless he is. And it affected the election in his county. Kevin Sabet, who you saw yesterday, nobody takes a bigger beating than Kevin. He's an absolute warrior on this issue. Kevin's out there speaking to everybody. He's got the ear of very high-level people in this country. So he's the main target, and it goes on, and I'm sure there are people in this room, probably in California and elsewhere, that they get the same treatment. You just got to be prepared for it. If you're going to say anything bad about marijuana, or you're going to talk in any way, shape, or form about this, you're going to get some of this blowback. Now in Colorado for us, where this all started was a voter initiative in the year 2000 that allowed marijuana for medical use. It was based on your California voter initiative from 1996. It was pretty limited. It only allowed certain people to be patients, and then you could either grow plants yourself and possess up to 2 ounces of pot, or you could designate a primary caregiver to do those functions for you. And it worked that way for a long time. But then the system broke down, the abuses started, the dispensaries that were unlicensed began popping up everywhere, and it was just like throwing gasoline on a flame. It just blew out of proportion quickly. So much so that a decade later, well actually let me go back to this for 1 second. In the year 2000 when this passed, I was on our drug task force at that time as well, and we were up to our eyeballs in meth labs. Another gift from California that came our way after a while. So we had the labs that you all saw, but they came to us a little bit later. And when the medical marijuana thing was going on, we were rightfully so pounding our fists at the legislature and everywhere else that we needed different laws to address this meth lab problem. They were blowing up, they were killing people, we were taking little babies out of these situations, but we didn't talk about this medical marijuana thing at all. We acted like, well, it's marijuana, that's a no big deal. Gee, we are in meth labs. And I see the same mistake. It was a mistake. We made that mistake. It wasn't a mistake to talk about meth labs, but it was a mistake to then downgrade marijuana as if it wasn't also a potential problem in other ways. I see the same thing happening today with this opiate crisis. It's a legitimate deal. It's a big problem. But we shouldn't downplay marijuana because of it. We shouldn't compare it. That's what the pro-legalizers do. Every time you talk about marijuana, they say, well, what about alcohol? What about opiates? What about Al-Qaeda? Whatever. And it's a distraction tactic to try to make the rest of the world seem so big and bad and evil, and this one thing that they want not. And so we fell into that trap. That dialogue is a gift to the movement of legalization because it's exactly what they say. So 10 years later, along comes, or 12 years later, I'm sorry, Amendment 64. The word amendment is important. In both of these cases, what the voters of Colorado did, and I guarantee they didn't know they were doing this, the general electorate, it modified our state constitution to allow marijuana for medical use and recreational use to be in our constitution. Why do we have a constitution? It protects civil rights and civil liberties. The right to free speech, the right to worship as you see fit, all the things, the right to be protected against government. In Colorado, pot is a constitutional right. That's how crazy we did this. And I guarantee the average voter didn't know that. They just saw the initiative and didn't know what it was that they were voting for. Kind of interesting, though, that you guys have, I think it's called Proposition 64 that you're going to be debating, and ours was Amendment 64. So I've been down this path before on the yes versus no on 64. But where Colorado turned the corner was not with the passage of Amendment 64. It happened a couple of years earlier, and it was through an act of legislation in Colorado that commercialized medical marijuana in 2010 under House Bill 1284. This is where Colorado became the epicenter of this entire movement because for the first time in our country's history, a state allowed a for-profit industry to exist, regulated of course, regulated and taxed, but it was the first for-profit industry for marijuana ever to be allowed. And at this particular time, early in our medical marijuana program, for most of the years, we had less than 2,000 people that were on our registry. when the breakdown started, for a variety of reasons, and the abuses all started happening, we shot up from 2,000 people that had been on forever to over 100,000 people, and that occurred in less than 2 years. There was a period of time where our health department was processing 1,100 applications a day for medical marijuana, and it was clearly recreational use being given a name and an excuse under something else. And there were a lot of medical marijuana patients that were appalled by that. They were absolutely outraged that people would actually use this medical system that had been created for them to basically get recreational pot, and then an industry that was profiting off it. This was absolutely abhorrent to some of these medical marijuana patients and caregivers. Well, hearings began on this. This was when the bill was being debated. I'm sitting up towards the front there. The guy in the far left, though, towards the bottom there, that's a guy named Mike Elliott. And he runs what's called the Marijuana Industry Group, which is sort of like a chamber of commerce for these marijuana dispensary owners. Very smart guy. He's an attorney, and he's, from my point of view, exceptionally manipulative in how he maneuvers public opinion on this issue to make it look like regulated marijuana and taxed marijuana is the end-all greatest thing in the world. Regulating marijuana, because it's federally illegal, and we should keep that in mind, the federal law has not changed. So when the government gets involved in regulating marijuana, that's another way of saying aiding and abetting the distribution of marijuana, which is a felony crime in this country. When we say taxing marijuana, we are saying money laundering. We are participating in money laundering, which is also a felony crime in this country. And we're allowing governmental entities to not only take part in this, but then order employees, task employees with actually violating these federal laws. There is no immunity anywhere from prosecution. The only thing that's been released is under the Obama administration. There's a guidance document that says these are our priorities for enforcement, but it does not exclude the government from that. It doesn't really address the government in any direct way. So this is a very big conundrum for us, because if we're in a governmental entity that regulates and taxes marijuana, we have to commit federal felonies in order to do it. And I personally refuse to do that. My city just now allowed an adoption for medical entities on marijuana to come into our city, which we've never had before. We had always opted out. New council got elected. They think we're going to make all kinds of money. And I flat, if I'm asked to do any function of it, I can tell you now, I will respectfully decline to do that, because I will not be put in that position to violate federal law. Now, some of my colleagues don't see it that way. They see it as, well, there's really not truly any enforcement happening, so therefore, I don't want to create waves that work, so I'll just go with it. Now, that's an individual choice people have to make, but we brought that up in these committee hearings. I testified, and we told them, you will put the general employees of the state and of any municipality in a position to have to violate federal law in order to carry this out. Now, on the counter side, of course, patient after patient after patient came in, and they came in their wheelchairs, and they brought their sick children, and they cried, and they held up their cards and said, my God, we have to have this, we have to have a clean, safe place, otherwise my grandmother with Alzheimer's, who needs pot for that, has to go to the back alley and deal with a cartel member instead of a clean, regulated shop. And when you lay it out like that, it's very difficult for legislators, I guess for these legislators anyway, to say no to it, and they allowed it. Over a lot of objections from not just law enforcement, but drug treatment providers, child protective service workers. I mean, it went on and on. There were lots of people in public health that said no. Medical associations saying this is a terrible idea. But they went ahead and did it. Now, why they did it, in part, was because this guy right here, a guy by the name of Matt Cook, who was an employee of the state of Colorado who worked at the Department of Revenue. He was tasked with a very unenviable task by our governor, that is not the current governor, it was our last one, to come up with some type of regulatory scheme to make it work. Because we had hundreds of dispensaries operating under loopholes in the medical marijuana law, and they wanted to regulate and tax them. So what he did was what his background was in, we have some limited gaming casinos in Colorado, not a ton of them, but a few, and that's where he was focused on. He was a regulator of the casinos. And so he says, well, I've got it, I know how we can do this. First of all, we'll create a marijuana enforcement division within the Department of Revenue. So we don't couple this in with alcohol and tobacco regulation. This is its own separate part of the Department of Revenue. And he says, here's what we'll do. And to me, this is just fiction. It's bells and whistles to make legislators feel like, okay, this is going to be highly regulated, but I'll show you why it really doesn't mean anything at the end of the day. He said, well, we have come up with a seed-to-sale system for marijuana, for tracking marijuana. Seed to sale. Remember Kevin said yesterday, you put it on a bumper sticker, and that's what sells, right? That's where we go with policy. Seed to sale. You can put that on a bumper sticker pretty easily. And this was his big thing, was he says, well, like the casinos, we're going to put cameras up in all the facilities, the growing facilities, the dispensaries, and these can be monitored by the Marijuana Enforcement Division 24/7 through a remote access, so we'll be able to see everything that goes on in these dispensaries. And this was really the novelty that sold the whole deal. But on top of that, he also proposed a couple of other things. He said, we'll come up with an inventory system that will include a barcode setup for the plants to help us track from seed to sale. We'll make sure that when the grow facility is bringing marijuana to a dispensary, they have to do a manifest, like a trucking manifest, and then we'll be able to approve that and know where the marijuana is, and we'll require electronic GPS tracking so we know where all the marijuana is going. All of these little bells and whistles sounded very cool to the legislators who wanted to feel like they were doing something positive to regulate this industry. Marijuana is the most regulated industry in all of Colorado. If you look at the marijuana code versus the liquor code is about that thick. The marijuana laws are like this. It's phenomenally huge and different trying to get a handle on marijuana versus alcohol. So to give you an idea what this looks like from the inside, this is a grow facility, a licensed grow facility in Denver. First thing you notice is there's about 1,000 air conditioning units on the top of the roof here because the lights and all the stuff that they need to grow the plants indoors create so much heat, you got to keep the place exceptionally cool. Well, if you're drawing this kind of power in, you also then need the power company to come and rig you up a special system of power just so you can get your facility up and going this way, which is what he did. So we come in, and the guy in the blue shirt there is the dispensary owner and this grow facility owner. He's got 4 grow facilities and 4 different dispensary outlets, and is a super nice guy. Super nice guy. He was a high school teacher before he became licensed by Colorado to be a drug dealer. But I'm telling you, he's a super nice guy, and this is what I see all the time, is this is a sort of, it's almost like hypnosis. The law enforcement people that go to regulate these businesses, they contact guys like this, and they're so open. Come in anytime, look at our records, watch our videos, whatever you want, we'll do. Because they're making so much money, they are willing to open everything up. You pass a regulation, all right, that's going to be a burdensome pain in the butt, but we'll follow it, and they go down this path. Well, it lulls the people regulating into a false sense of security that these are really legitimate people that are out there doing legitimate things. Some of them might be. There might be some that would follow every single rule and all that, but at the core of what they're doing is illegal, so I don't, it's hard for me to legitimize any of it. But when you deal with this guy versus what I'm going to show you later, some of the indoor marijuana grows that we have in homes, some of the out-of-state diversion groups we're dealing with, this guy looks like a saint. And it's very easy for us in law enforcement to start thinking of him different than the other drug dealer who's doing it out of his home. And so here's part of the reason why, is because there's so much sanctioning within the state and in the city. This guy's got a whole array of licenses and things that have been given to him by different governmental entities to legitimize him for this activity. So he's got several different rooms he takes us into. The first room I didn't take a picture of, but it's just where they do the little seedling plants with the clones, which is just a clipping of a mature plant that they put in a growing medium to make another plant the same as the one that they took the clipping off of. But when the plants get a little bit bigger, they go into this room here, where the plants are in a vegetated growing state, and they hit it with this ultraviolet light because this represents summer sun. And when you look down at the bottom of these plants, you'll see these barcodes. There's blue barcodes for retail plants. There's yellow barcodes for medical plants. So we had a guy with us from New Zealand. We have all kinds of people from all over the world that come to Colorado to try to get a look at what's going on. So a law enforcement guy from New Zealand came in, and he was the one we were showing around. So I started asking questions because the guy that owns the thing, he says, yeah, you can record me, film me, whatever. So the New Zealand guy's doing that, so I started asking some questions just to prompt to see what the answers were going to be. And I said, well, let me ask you about this barcode situation here. If you, for whatever reason, I said, first of all, is the DNA of the plant somehow encoded in that barcode so that you'd know that that plant definitively went with that barcode? And he says, no. He says, what we do is we draw a diagram of the room where all the plants are, and then we note where the barcodes go, scan the barcode in, and then that just equates back to our diagram. And I said, well, so what, I don't know why you would want to do this, but for example, if you wanted to switch that yellow one with that blue one and the blue one with the yellow one, how would anybody know? And he says, well, no one would know. I mean, because there's nothing in the DNA of the plant that's on there. And I said, okay, well, so do you have to then declare to the state that you have, 1,000 plants, so you need 1,000 barcodes, and that way it's sort of a check and balance? And he says, no. He goes, we order these barcodes from a third-party vendor. He goes, I got a whole closet full of them. And I said, well, I don't understand then. How does the state know for sure you have as many plants as you say you do? And he goes, look, I know what you're getting at. He goes, they don't audit like this. He says, they come in and they look and make sure that all the employees are wearing the name tags, and they look and check the barcodes, and they might look at a few of our records, but it's a spot inspection and they're in and out in about 15 minutes. He goes, that's all that they do. They're not doing what you're saying. And so every time I hear somebody talk about, well, they let you look at their books, and they let you do this, and they let you do that. Well, for the number of dispensaries that exist in Colorado, and for that matter in California, and the number of people you have regulating, I don't know how in the world you could possibly do thorough audits of that. It just wouldn't even make sense. So anyhow, we move on a little further, and when the plants mature, they go into these rooms here. And we've got a whole, it's so hard to see on these screens, but this is a hallway where there's multiple rooms down the hallway on both sides. And these rooms they hit with a red spectrum light because in the fall, this is what the plants see. We don't necessarily see this with our naked human eye, but this is the spectrum the plants see, and they say, oh, it's fall, it's time to bud, and it's time to seed, because that's how they reproduce. Well, and that's obviously what these guys want for marijuana in order to get the bud THC. So once the plants mature here, they trim them, and then they take all the processed marijuana, the buds, and they lay them out on these drying racks. So once they put all the marijuana on the drying rack, they weigh it, and then they put it on in the slat, and it sits there for a few days until it dries, and then they come back and they weigh it again. Well, if you know anything about marijuana, it's going to weigh more when you put it on than when you take it off, because the water weight comes off and it changes the weight of the plants. So someone asked the question, they said, well, okay, so then how do you know that your employees don't come in here and grab fistfuls of pot out of each of these deals and take them home with them? And he laughed, he goes, well, they probably do. He goes, we would have no way to know. So, and as you can see, the barcodes have now gone away because they have to just put them on a numbered system here. Once they dry, then by strain and whatever else they do, they start categorizing them and putting them in these jars while they generate new barcodes to now pick up the trail from this point. And then they take whatever amounts they're going to put into dispensed form that go into the official packaging that then goes to the dispensary. So that's basically the way it works at the grow facilities. Now, when you looked around, sure enough, there's cameras everywhere. The guy had tons of cameras up, just like he's supposed to. In his shop, he had a couple little screens, and you can see what the cameras look like to him. This is his one facility. These are the cameras. Now, keep in mind, there are, I don't even remember what the latest number is, Chelsea. Are you going to go over that? How many thousands of licensed dispensaries there are? Or hundreds at least? Okay. She'll tell you how many of them that there are. But this is one grow facility, and look at what that looks like. Just if you were to sit in this one thing, what in the heck would you see? what would you be looking for? I imagine like rows and rows of people at NORAD watching these cameras going, I think that guy might have done something. This is all to give tummy comfort to the public and to legislators that this is something that's really highly regulated and watched. He said, he goes, well, I've got 45 cameras in this facility alone. 45 in this one facility. He said, oh, and by the way, it cost me $700,000 to set this place up the way I needed it, including the power setup and all that. And just as an aside, he pays $11,000 a month in utilities just to power this place up. That's one grow facility. It's incredible. So then he takes us over to one of his dispensaries, and same kind of thing. You walk in, you sign in on the log, and then you can walk in, and there's all kinds of products available. Plenty of inventory, you know, plenty of stuff on the shelf, candies, flower, marijuana, whatever you want, all kinds of stuff. He says at this one location, again he's got 4, he says he has about 250 customers a day. The average sale is $75 a person, so in 1 year his gross income at that one place was $6 million. You heard the gentleman earlier today talk about the licensing fees here in California, $60,000 a year for licensing fees, and I heard a gasp out of the audience. This dude would make that in 3.5 days at this one dispensary. 60 grand that he can pay for his licensing fees in 3.5 days. So it's an incredible amount of money these guys are making. Now, how's it been going? Well, we kept pointing out to the legislature and to others that there were a whole bunch of problems with this regulatory scheme, even though the media and the national media were hoisting Matt Cook up like he had solved the Da Vinci Code somehow and figuring out how to regulate marijuana. And we kept telling them, there are all these problems. There's this problem, this problem, this problem, this problem. All of a sudden, out of the blue in 2012, an auditor shows up. And there's a state auditor from the Office of the Legislative, what is it? You know, it's the Office of the State Auditor. This is out of the legislature. They ordered an audit. They took a look at all things medical marijuana, the dispensaries, the Department of Health that regulates the patients, caregivers. They took a look at all of it. And both reports came out in 2013. You can find them online. And they are absolutely scathing indictments of how bad this is going in Colorado as of 2013. And I can tell you it has not changed. What has changed is, that was also when we voted in recreational legalization. The reports were published a couple months after the vote, not before. And they basically took the medical marijuana protocols and regulations and they changed a few words to allow for the recreational industry. That's essentially what they did. So it's pretty much the same scheme. Take a look at these. These are hundreds and hundreds of pages talking about the problems with regulating marijuana in Colorado. Now, how did the public, what was their perception of what they were doing when they legalized pot? Well, in the run-up to the election in November of 2012, the advertising campaign started, and one of the big core components of this was compare marijuana to alcohol constantly and always point out the worst, most horrific parts of alcohol. Or at least try to make a contrast that it's a choice, like Kevin Sabet was saying. They always make it sound like somehow if you legalize pot, then alcohol problems are going to start to go away. So billboards like this started popping up everywhere. And you can see how strategically placed it is over a liquor store here, trying to make the liquor store look bad and all. And they used this photo, and I don't know if this woman is an actual advocate for marijuana or just an actress or a clip art person, or I don't know what. But what I do know is the reason why they chose that particular image of a white woman roughly of that age, because that's the voter that made the difference. When you look at polling, that's the voter that made the difference. These moms, typically moms, did not historically like the idea of marijuana legalization. They're watching their loser husbands and boyfriends sit and smoke pot all day. They don't like that. And they definitely don't want their kids getting involved in it. So they had to convince this voter that this was the right thing to do. So this was one way they did it. And they kept saying, we're going to regulate it like alcohol. Well, really? Really? You're going to regulate it like alcohol? First of all, alcohol has... If you're going to regulate it like alcohol, here's what you'd have to do. Every country that allows alcohol would have to allow marijuana. That way you couldn't divert it to those countries and make money off of any black market. All of the United States would have to allow it wherever alcohol is legal. You'd have to have a international, national, state, and local regulatory structure that works in tandem with each other. You'd have to have all that in order to regulate like marijuana or like alcohol, and I'll show you why there's another component that's even more problematic. But if you look at the two in Colorado, and these pie charts are not great, but it was the best thing I could think of to try to represent this. But if that blue area in Colorado represents the legal alcohol market, alcohol is generally a legal substance. It's legal in Colorado with restrictions. You have to be 21, there's certain places you can buy it, there's certain places you can't consume it. Very, very few restrictions. But generally speaking, if you walk into someone's house and they've got from floor to ceiling cases of Budweiser, that's legal. If they're driving around with unopened alcohol in their car and they're not drinking or drunk, that's legal. All that stuff is legal. With marijuana in Colorado, it's the exact opposite. Marijuana is illegal. The default position with marijuana in Colorado is that it's illegal under even state law, with exceptions. They carve out exceptions if you're 21. They carve out exceptions if you've got a medical marijuana card. They carve out exceptions for the industry. And the exceptions have become very, very complicated for law enforcement to figure out. Because now you have restrictions on how much you can have, how much you can grow. It's not open-ended. It's not all marijuana is legal. Just these little exceptions for marijuana. And because of that, law enforcement officers will walk into a home and there's 300 plants growing in this house. And people over 21 are only supposed to have 6. But oh, guess what? In our constitutional amendment, it says you can also assist others with growing plants or possessing marijuana. So now that 6 plants could be 600 if you had enough friends to make up the difference on the rest. And this is the craziness of it. And then is it medical or is it recreational? Because if it's medical, then physicians can also write in there that you can have more plants than what the state constitution allows. There's an allowance for that. So physicians will take an extra $100 and sign you up for 75 plants a patient or 99 plants a patient. And you walk into these gigantic grows. Same stuff law enforcement here is saying with these medical marijuana things. Guaranteed it's the same thing. Same thing you heard from Washington and Oregon as well. So what does your rank and file law enforcement officer do? They look at it and go, we can't get juries to convict on it. We can't get prosecutors to take these cases. It's so damn complicated, it's going to take all my night to sort out this one grow. Looks good to me, I'm out. And that's what's happened, is a disengagement, which is exactly what the pro-legalizing group wants. How else did they try to convince that voter on the poster? This was their most ingenious tactic right here.
We all know where the money from non-medical marijuana sales is currently going. It doesn't need to be that way. If we pass Amendment 64, Colorado businesses would profit and tax revenues would pay for public services and the reconstruction of our schools. Let's vote for the good guys and against the bad guys. Let's have marijuana tax money go to our schools rather than criminals in Mexico. Vote for
Yeah. So they allow all this taxation of pot, and they included in the language an excise tax that the first however many millions would go to school construction projects. People thought that meant, oh, all our school budget problems are going to be fixed, and they started voting for this thing. Just this last month, our 9 News, is that our NBC affiliate? 9. Our NBC affiliate, Local News, ran a series of stories. Where is this marijuana tax money going? And it's fascinating because they talk to school teachers and officials, and they're like, yeah, in some of the rural communities there's money coming in for projects, but when you look at it in comparison with the money needed, it's nothing. It's really nothing. And one school administrator, his quote was the best, and I'm not going to get it verbatim, but it was awesome. It was something to the effect of, the only thing marijuana has brought to our schools is more marijuana in our schools. And I mean, they all hoped, school administrators hoped, this was going to be some kind of a budget windfall for them. And so I've heard however many of them in Colorado were like, I voted for this. I had no idea the impact it was going to have on our schools and on our students and on the culture. We had no idea the suspension rates were going to go through the roof and the expulsions were going to go through the roof. We had no idea. We thought we were going to get a ton of money to, you know, fix our playgrounds or pay for our teachers. And that wasn't the only promise they made. Oh, they said all kinds of things. Tax money, you'd have safer drivers, there'd be less DUIs out on the road, because instead of going to the bar and getting drunk and driving home, people will stay home and smoke pot. Kids won't be able to have access because the industry's going to make sure that people are only 21 that can buy pot, as if that's the only way a kid's going to get it. Cartels were going to go away, the black market was going to go away, which would then free up jails and free up our valuable police resources, right? Police, we were the ones saying this is a terrible idea, and they're like, no, this is a gift to you. Because now you can go track down all those rapists and murderers that you don't go track down now because you're out kicking doors on marijuana smokers, you know? It was an absolute absurd deception. And here's how far they went with it. Check out this ad.
Well, I had 36 years as a police officer in Denver. I can't recall a single incident where marijuana was a cause of violence. There's plenty to do without having to spend all your time going around looking for a marijuana bust. It's a matter of setting your priorities. Regulating the sale of marijuana will allow law enforcement to direct resources towards serious crime. To me, the regulation of marijuana means safer communities. Please vote yes on Amendment 64.
Now this is tough, because now the public, they've got all the money on their side, so they're able to put this ad out. And now they're trying to make it look like, well, even law enforcement's for it. And I'll tell you, one of the big problems we had in law enforcement, and we have in Colorado, was that we didn't have enough people speaking out against it. And I'm telling you now, if you don't condone it, or if you don't condemn it, you're passively condoning it. And that's exactly the way they took kind of a silence from law enforcement, a silence from the schools, a silence from the medical community, was all seen as condoning. And so what I also found interesting was, you guys know this better than anybody, because California, you guys are always where all these problems seem to really hit hardest. Well, think about it. I mean, you've got the meth problem, you know, all these things you guys typically get before we do. And so you also know, better than most, that these sorts of pushes are usually well-funded campaigns by groups that are trying to, you know, maneuver this objective into your culture. But to the average person, like in Colorado, I think there was a belief that this was just like a little grassroots thing that had popped up. Like few citizens wanted to do this, and everybody else was like, yeah, if it's going to help our schools, let's do it. I know they felt that in Alaska. I went up to talk to the Chiefs Association last year, and in doing research for what Alaska was going through, I found this, which just seemed a tiny bit familiar. Their initiative was 2 years after ours.
In all my years on the streets, it's hard to recall a single time where marijuana use itself was the cause of a violent incident. As a police officer, I do believe that passing ballot measure 2 will allow law enforcement to focus on serious issues in Alaska. To me, the regulation of marijuana means safer communities. I voted yes on 2.
This communication was paid for by the Campaign to Regulate Marijuana and Alcohol. Top contributors are Marijuana Policy Project, Drug Policy Alliance, and Thomas Cody Swift.
Those top contributors just mentioned, not one of them are from Alaska. Washington, D.C., New York, state of Washington, not one from Alaska. And it did sound incredibly familiar. So going even comparing them side by side, it's virtually the same script. And there are groups out there, like there's a group called Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, LEAP, and these guys are advocating for marijuana legalization all the time. It's typically retired cops, retired judges, folks like that, who either are true believers in this, or they're being paid some pretty good money to come out and flaunt their law enforcement creds. The guy from Alaska there, according to what I saw on the internet, it looks like he might have an association with LEAP somehow. But when I was talking to the Chiefs Association, his chief actually came up and he goes, yep, that's my guy. And I said, well, what's his deal? And he goes, he's just a guy that believes that it should be a personal right. It's just his belief. And so he didn't violate any of our department policies by this ad, so we really couldn't do anything about it. But yeah, that's what happened. So Colorado has morphed into something almost unrecognizable to me because of a lot of these issues and problems. If you've ever been to Denver, this is the 16th Street Mall, and it's a beautiful place where people can go and shop and have lunch, and there's nightlife. Well, they've also started opening up marijuana dispensaries on this mall, and so there's constant pot smoking going on in the mall. People complain about it all the time. Chelsea talked about the Visitors Bureau. They can't even book conventions because people don't want to go to this mall anymore because of all the problems. And we've attracted homeless like I've never seen. People coming in from everywhere because they not only can be part of getting high all the time with pot, but they also get involved in other drugs because they perceive, and I think rightfully so, Colorado has gone very, very lax on drug use of all kinds. So we have a huge influx of homeless that come in. Well, what's that done? Required more cops to be on the mall. So this isn't reducing law enforcement burden. This now adds some new burdens to what we've already had to do. Then we had this incident that happened about a month or so ago. And this is from somebody's cell phone camera. On the mall, whatever's causing, whatever the heck this news deal is, the attack goes on for a while. They ultimately, it's not in the video, but he's ultimately arrested, and the news, a lot of the news stations went and interviewed him, and he said, he says, I've had a long history of mental health problems, and came to Colorado for the marijuana. Just goes on and on. So the Denver mayor, in his response to this and to other similar incidents, this is the Denver mayor's quote. Let's be clear, marijuana is drawing people to the mall. He added, this is one of the unintended consequences of legal marijuana. The mayor said the city will continue to increase police presence on the mall and to enforce current laws, and they are doing that. They're having to put private security and more law enforcement down there on the mall. Unrelated to that, 2 days later, we get some guy walking out of a Chili's restaurant who is randomly stabbed for no apparent reason on the mall. And this is another unrelated thing, another headline, 5 arrested for assault on the 16th Street Mall. This is what's driving tourism away from Denver because of these incidents. Other black market issues. So here's a case that my unit worked on a guy who was driving around offering marijuana for sale, basically. So we sent an undercover officer to go make a purchase from him, which he did. We follow the car till it goes to this gas station. We get patrol to stop him and arrest him. We find marijuana in his car. It came from a dispensary, or at least these are dispensary packaging. Note the barcode, everyone. And we recover our money for the buy. While we're going through the car, I noticed behind the passenger seat up front, I noticed the butt of a gun. So I pull it out and I'm taking a picture of it, and somebody says, well, hey, Sarge, I got a gun back here if you want to take a picture of it too. So I take that one, and then the guy goes, hey, I've got a few more guns in the back if you want to take a picture of it here. And so this is just this dude driving around like the ice cream man selling pot to people out of his car. And what his claim was is he goes, well, no, I'm not a pot dealer, I'm a pot consultant. And so people are paying me to consult for my expertise and knowledge about marijuana. And then I give them for free, if they're 21, I give them for free an 1/8 of an ounce or whatever. Well, that's technically, the gifting part of that is legal in Colorado. If it's up to an ounce, if 2 people are 21 and you just give somebody pot that's under an ounce, that's legal. What he didn't realize was that we had an undercover cop with a microphone on and there was never consulting services offered or whatever. But this is the kind of nonsense that's going on all the time. People get on Craigslist, and there's Craigslist dealers that are constantly making black market deals all over Denver. Then we have this other situation. This is another case my unit worked not long ago. We called it Operation Texas Thc, and the reason we called it Texas Thc was because there was a whole big group of Vietnamese folks that had come up from Houston, bought property all over Metro Denver and down into Colorado Springs, growing marijuana in all these houses. None of this is licensed or legal. Growing in all these homes, and then they're shipping it back to Houston. So it took us over a year to sort this out, how many houses were involved, because one house would be in the city of Westminster, 2 of them would be in the city of Thornton, 1 of them would be down in Inglewood, another one would be in Colorado Springs. We had to tie all these together somehow and figure out where all these facilities were. We ended up dismantling about 30 grow operations that day. You can see, because there are a couple of them here. There's one of my detectives standing in front of one of those little marijuana plants, right? And there's me standing in front of the big pile that we took that day. That was ultimately over 6,000 pounds of marijuana we took out of this case. But that's not the only issue we have to deal with, although that type of thing this type of operation is so common right now. All of our drug task forces that need to do a variety of things. Of course, we have to deal with marijuana and the marijuana problems. We've also got this heroin problem we need to deal with. We still have methamphetamine on our streets. But a ton of our time now is being diverted to this alone because neighbors are complaining. We're seeing the organized crime come in with all this. So this has not freed up our time, folks. This is consuming our time. We can't deal with other drug issues because of this. And then we get these more sophisticated operations. The guy in the upper left corner there, the reason why he's upside down in that little news clip is because he owned a skydiving business. And one of the things he was doing was transporting from his plane marijuana that was being grown to Minnesota, I believe, and his organization got caught by a group. The guy to the right there is an attorney in Denver who had somehow helped set up a dummy corporation and some kind of a licensing scheme of a dispensary in Colorado where they were using it as a front. Two guys down below are Colombian nationals who were funding the operation, and it appears, I wasn't part of this investigation, so I'm paraphrasing what I saw in the news, but it was essentially money from Colombia that was coming in to set up and finance this grow operation with front people in Denver who could pass the background checks, and then we're getting a cut of this money. Marijuana was then grown in all kinds of hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions, I don't remember, were being then funneled back to Colombia. So this is the kind of thing, this is very complicated to deal with. So the little graphic there to the right, drug traffickers seek safe haven amid legal marijuana. That is an Associated Press report that came out a few months ago talking about all the Cubans and all the other groups, that transnational organized crime groups that have come into Colorado, or even United States citizens that have come into Colorado from other states to do this sort of activity. It's more than we can handle right now. So going back to this idea of regulating and taxing, here is the core problem of why this system does not work. Not only do you not have a federal, state, local, and international system like you do with alcohol, but you've also got a very big disparity in cost. So if you go into a grocery store here or a 7-Eleven or something, and you're a tobacco user, and you go buy one of those little round things of chewing tobacco, that's 1 ounce of tobacco that's going to cost less than $5 typically, all right? So that would be represented by the far left chart there, $5 an ounce. Marijuana at the lower end is selling for about $150 an ounce at the lower end for medium to low grade marijuana in the dispensaries. That's no taxes or nothing, that's base price. That is a gigantic difference. You add the taxes on it, which marijuana in Colorado is taxed, recreational marijuana, at 30%, and that adds on a little bit more, so your $150 becomes $195. It's not that tax rate that's causing the black market. That's what the proponents want you to think. Well, if the taxes weren't so high, we wouldn't have the black market. No, you would, because what you're buying for $3 an ounce of in tobacco would cost you $150 in marijuana, even with no taxes. And because you can grow it in your home, or you can buy it on the black market and resell it, it becomes a very profitable thing to do. And why is it that tobacco can be sold for $3 and marijuana gets sold for so much more? Well, it's because you don't have the same number of buyers and users. If you look at alcohol and tobacco, we have so many people using those products, they can be sold for dirt cheap. That's why there's not much of a black market for either. But marijuana and other things, there's a very much smaller number of users, and so therefore you can't sell it for that amount. Imagine if you want to go into business today selling 8-track tape players. For the 5 of us in here who knows what an 8-track tape player is. You know, after a few people bought it for their camp value, you'd never make any money on it. You could mass produce billions of 8-track tape players, no one's going to buy them. Same thing with marijuana right now. Until you get the use rates up high enough, you're not going to have an impact. So they do that with the edibles, and there's all kinds of articles about how these edibles have caused people problems. We're seeing an increase of kids going into the ER because they're getting into this stuff and they're not realizing what it is. But where it really comes down to a big problem is that some of these people have had an extremely bad reaction to not just edible marijuana products, but flower marijuana as well. The kid on the left you've heard about a million times, but this is his picture. This is the kid, the 19-year-old who got a marijuana cookie, ate it, flipped out in the hotel in Denver and threw himself off the balcony and killed himself. Right around that same time, this woman on the right, her husband was eating a bunch of these edible products. He flipped out, put a gun to her head. She called 911, and while she was screaming for help, he pulled the trigger and killed her. The surviving children now are suing the marijuana manufacturing company as being liable for this death. We've had this guy here, Luke Goodman. He was from Tulsa, Oklahoma. Came up with his buddies on a ski trip. He was like 23, 24 years old. He wanted to see what the marijuana thing was all about. So he bought some of these edible things, these peach edibles. He ate a bunch of them. They hit him. His friends said that he whacked out. They didn't know what happened to him. He always traveled with a gun. He put that gun to his head and committed suicide. Also from Oklahoma are these two guys, Joshua Foster, Zachary Moore. Their burned and dead bodies were found in a car that had been set on fire after they were murdered. They had come to Colorado to do some sort of a marijuana transaction. They were trying to buy multi-pounds and take it back, but the guy decided to rob them and kill them and take their money instead. I don't have time for this, but it's a news report about this young man here, Daniel Juarez, who was smoking marijuana with a friend of his, and he flipped out, ran into his house. The friend didn't know where he went, so the friend went home. The mom found Daniel a while later on the kitchen floor. He had stabbed himself 20 times, fatally piercing his heart. In the news report, you'd see that the toxicology report showed nothing in his system but high levels of THC. The marijuana wasn't laced with anything. Our task force, this happened in our task force jurisdiction. We recovered more marijuana. It wasn't laced with anything. This is just his reaction to whatever it was. Chad Britton, a high school kid, getting into his car right before Thanksgiving, and another student was driving up the street dabbing, hitting those high concentrates, ran Chad over and killed him, and then didn't even realize he had hit somebody. Recently, the kid was convicted on that. This is Josh Wittig, a 18-year-old medical marijuana patient who was getting high with his buddies one night, and as he was driving home, drifted into the oncoming lane of traffic and killed this guy, John Hines, who was on a motorcycle coming the other direction. It was a head-on impact. Aralia Cisneros, a 10-year-old girl whose father was a marijuana dealer. His door was kicked in during a home invasion, gunfire started, and 10-year-old Aralia was killed in the gunfire. Travis Mason, just a couple months ago, a security guard at a dispensary, murdered during a robbery. And the Denver district attorney a few years ago had gotten so tired of the marijuana advocates saying, well, you're lying, there's never violence around marijuana. He put this video together. This goes back a few years, but it chronicles a dozen deaths, and you can see it on YouTube. It's under the deadly impact of medical marijuana in Colorado. These are just the ones that are hitting the news that I just happened to grab. That does not represent all the people who've died. In fact, George Brockler, who's a district attorney in the south of Denver, he's actually did a news report recently talking about the number of murders related to marijuana and how they're skyrocketing in Colorado because of these robberies. People coming in from out of state, they're getting robbed and marijuana taken from them. It's a lot of people dying, folks, over a drug that supposedly doesn't kill anyone. And I just hope that as you guys go forward, you learn from Colorado. We did not have this at our disposal when we made this decision in Colorado. No other state had done it, but now other states have. And I certainly hope that you guys factor that into your decision come November. Thank you all very much.
So Jim is he's going to catch his flight, but any questions that you have for Mr. Gerhardt, please provide that to the attendants here. What we will do is we'll collect those, we'll send him an email listing all the questions, he will respond, and we will disseminate that information to you. So just like all the other people.